Welcome everyone to this week's CyberTank variety show. This week we are here with the artists from this Friday's show, Radio Bemba, 4 short one-act plays that are going to be live on YouTube, on the Tank's YouTube. Formerly, this is called the Radio Bemba Artist Discussion Section, and I'm so excited to be here with everyone. We have a couple people who may pop in later on, and we're going to be discussing for the next bit of time. I do want to plug the 2 shows that aren't here. That is Chase Doggett's La Princesita and Makasha Copeland's Clickbait. They are both in Texas and currently are without water still. They just got their electricity back, and heroically they're making it for this weekend, and I'm really excited for their plays as well. The other 2 plays are one by me, After Sitting Zoom Shiva for Zev, and Christopher Columbus is in the Waiting Room by Edie Celia Garcia, who is here with us. So let's begin by just going around and introducing ourselves, who we are, our pronouns, where we're from, and our involvement with the show.
I can go first. So again, my name is Edie Celia Garcia. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I am the writer and director for Christopher Columbus is in the Waiting Room. I am an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and director based in the Bronx, New York, and a lot of my work centers colonialism, racism, and intergenerational trauma, particularly in Puerto Rican legacy. And you know what? For time, I'm going to pass it, and I'm going to pass it to Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Tanch. I'm playing Christopher Columbus, and Christopher Columbus is in the Waiting Room. I'm living in Brooklyn right now. I went to school in the same area as all the other ladies in the play, and I'm just really happy to be a part of this project. When Edie's reached out to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't to work with Edie. I've always wanted to. I can't wait. So I'm very excited for this weekend. I'm going to pass it to Jordan.
Thank you, Rumi. My name's Jordan Elizabeth Reid. I'm a theater, performance, and burlesque artist based in Brooklyn. Pretty much all of us here that are part of Edie's piece, which is all of us here, know Edie's because we were part of like the 5-college system in Western Mass, where I'm originally from, but Brooklyn baby now. And I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm going to pass it to Sabine.
Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. My name is Sabine Shock. I use she, her pronouns. I am playing Michael, and Christopher Columbus is in the Waiting Room in Mass area. So I'm still here. I'm getting my master's, or completing my master's in international education and a certificate in social justice education. I'm an actress and theater baby at heart. I'm a theater practitioner, and a lot of my work centers around utilizing Black diasporic arts and theater practices as sites for healing, transformation, love, and joy, and really thinking about how we can utilize our art as a tool for reimagining those societies in which we need today. And so I'm going to pass it off to my girl, Sandra.
Hi, I'm Sandra. I'm Sandra. I use she, they pronouns. I am living in a basement in Boston currently with my cat. We're having a great time. I primarily act and trying to do stuff with cameras, whether it's photography or cinematography. Just making art with my friends right now, loving it, and I hope I keep on doing it.
And Isaiah, you haven't introduced. Yes.
I'm Isaiah. I am also from Western Mass. I grew up in Amherst, which is funny. I also have a roommate that's coming today, and I can hear him. He just came in, so he should be here very soon behind this wall right here. I am the writer for one of the shows. I'm also an actor. Yeah. Oh, and I use he, him pronouns. So let me start off by asking Edie's about the show that is in. I guess could you tell us a little bit about Christopher Columbus is in the waiting room? Yeah. What's the origin of it? Where did it come from? Any spoilers for people watching?
I'm screaming. So yeah, Christopher Columbus is in the waiting room was first a challenge to myself to want to write about trauma in a way that isn't trauma porn, that isn't exploitative, that isn't or even in other ways that I think we talk about trauma as like healing. And just at first it started off as, how can I poke fun at this very horrible person? So I imagined the hell that is waiting in Zoom rooms for things to start. And I thought, let's put Christopher Columbus in there, in this little personal hell of mine. But then as I started writing it, and also as I had conversations with these really wonderful women who are in this Zoom room right now, I realized that personally for me, part of my practice is that I am not able to do that. I'm not able to make light of something that is so intrinsic to my history and to my legacy. And so this first half of the show starts off as like ruckus, very silly way of looking at the dynamics of heaven and hell as this corporate office system. And then it slowly became something more buried in the body, and was something that I guess I hadn't explored within myself in a long time. And so Christopher Columbus is in the waiting room. The premise is that it's just this idea of Christopher Columbus having waited 500 years in a Zoom waiting room as part of his purgatory, awaiting his judgment day. And he's waiting to be judged by God, Michael, Lucifer, and Beelzebub in the Zoom call. And so it starts off this ridiculous ruckus way and then turns into something a little more resonant to, I think, our conversations today. So yeah, that's what it's about. And it's been an honor to work with these really amazing women on the show. It's an all femme cast. So even Christopher Columbus is played by a woman. So very exciting.
And what I guess I want to get other what has the process been like of getting everyone together, especially in a time in which, you know, we're all in such different locations? What's that been like for everyone? Edie, you can answer, or someone else can answer. I think Michael can also speak to it after when we talk about our show as well.
It's honestly been a joy. These are really hard topics to talk about, and I know that because we've established relationships before, it's been a lot easier to deal with it, because the monologues that God has and Christopher Columbus has are very heavy, and we try to make it hold each other in a way, because it's very personal for us. Even though like Emily's white, but she's still, how do I say, has feelings. And I'm sorry. But we are all Caribbean, and that is where Christopher Columbus first landed, and it's very personal for all of us.
Yeah, and I'll speak to getting us together, just like logistics wise. Like, we have a Facebook group chat. I'm not always the best with responding, but I see the messages though. I'll just like point at myself for that. But I think that because of the times that we're in, and because of, forced isolation for some folks, and, like not really being able to be creative in the ways that we're used to, and the ways that have been so normalized. I think we jumped on the the task at hand of just like coming together to put this piece on, because it's art, and at least for me, I'll speak for myself, it's very healing. And like, you know, after being on Zooms all day, it's can be really frustrating to have to go back on Zoom again, but it never feels like that with our rehearsal space, because it feeds the soul, and it feels like it feels like I'm doing like the theater that we used to do in person, but you know, just like it's just been modified to being online. And like just what Sandra was saying, like we hold each other, we laugh with each other, we give each other feedback. So it feels as if we are in person, which isn't very easy to do via Zoom. And I think that's just a testament to our relationships with each other, our relationships to work, our love for Edie's and her writing. Take it, Edie's, receive this. So yeah, it's the process for getting together has been fairly easy, I think. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but there's just a love in the space and a love for each other and a love for the work that makes coming on to Zoom, like another Zoom space and meeting, just feel a little different and feel like home, because the theater is home.
Let me take this moment to introduce, or let Michael introduce himself. We have a new member. If you're just tuning in now, this is Radio Bemba Artist Discussion Section. We have a show this Friday at 8 p.m. And Michael here is a director for a piece I wrote. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself? We loosely had name, pronouns, origin, and involvement, but feel free to introduce yourself however you would like.
Sure. First of all, really nice to meet all of you, and a pleasure to be in collaboration. I'm Michael Hurwitz. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am directing Isaiah's play, which is called Actor Sitting Zoom Shiva for Zev. And I'm very happy to be here. It was something that's sort of it is sort of easy to forget when we're rehearsing these plays on our own that they are actually being presented in an evening as part of sort of a series. And so to see all of your faces and to be here with you in this conversation is so nice to be like, great, like actually collectively together, we are making an evening of theater, and that is sort of the beauty of it. And so it's thrilling to remember that is part of our mission and sort of today and in this process.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sabine, you brought up something that I think is really interesting, and that the prospect of doing online theater is something that I jumped at, and you know, it was so exciting to me, and I miss it so much, and being in it, it feels almost, you know, it's so it brings so much fulfillment to be with people we love and make theater. Do you guys think that online theater has a future past a year or two? Edie's is giving me a heavy yes, but can someone talk about that? What does it bring that I want to say regular theater, but I guess that's like othering online theater, if you will.
In-person theater.
Yeah, in-person theater. Thank you. Yeah, can someone talk about that?
I feel like it does have a future, because I think something that theater in person was struggling with even prior to the pandemic was maintaining accessibility. And I think that doing this work virtually is something that changes that dynamic, because most people have access to a library or a device in their home, just because like the nature of how our life is now, so much of it has paying bills, et cetera, is required to be online. So yeah, also like I've seen a lot of online adaptations do a kind of on-demand structure too. So it's also more accessible, because you're not having to like change your work schedule or whatever to be able to see a show. Now you're paying a ticket, and then you know you can go access that link and watch it more than once if you want to. So that I think it does have a future in that.
I think also the paths and the potential for online theater, and not just online, I think in multimedia, multidisciplinary theater, streamed online through the internet, there's so many possibilities. I think this time has really pushed truly creative artists to really think within parameters to create even more extraordinary work that is really centered on quality versus resources, which goes back to Jordan's point about accessibility. Accessibility also has to do with what is available to you as an artist. And when you only have your building rooftop as a stage or a bathroom play, I mean, I think that is where such beautiful narratives of creation can happen. One of my pet peeves about Zoom theater is when they try to trick you into thinking it's not on Zoom. Just like this, oh yeah, let me put a green screen of a bar because it's set in a bar. And it just feels so campy in a way that's not intentional. I think when we lean into mediums and lean into something I used to say in another show that I did was lean into the glitch, lean into just these mediums and lean into these forms in order to create, because they're also tools. So I think if people are smart, I think there is definitely a future with online, quote unquote, theater, and not just online, just theater that isn't necessarily in physical spaces.
Yeah, if you asked me that question before I worked on Edith's first Zoom play, I would have been like, no, we need to be in person with real life rehearsals. And then we did Enigma that Edith directed, and then she used like Zoom features to help tell the story. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm convinced. You have convinced this old-fashioned grandma stuck in a 23-year-old's body in 2021 that this has a future. So yeah, the future is in Edie's, in my opinion.
I'm also curious, Sandra, I saw that and I was wondering, you know, I was also in a piece of Zoom theater. I acted in it, and there is something so different about the thing that really stuck with me really was finishing a show. The Zoom call ends and you realize that you're alone in your room again, and you don't have to go out and meet anyone. And in fact, even if you want to, you can't. Actors and directors too. What is the process different? I don't know. Does anyone want to speak about the process and how it's different or how it's not?
Yeah, I feel like did I cut someone off? No. Okay.
You go ahead.
I feel like yeah, there's something I've noticed with doing a role that's emotionally challenging. I think when you have something in person and you have like the rush of, you know, cheering the audience after the show, whatever, like that kind of can replace the heaviness that is brought on by an emotionally challenging role with this kind of light, fuzzy feeling. And so you're able to kind of move on and like go back into the day. And so something I kind of realized, I think, with this show is like, oh, well, if you're doing something emotionally challenging and it's over Zoom, and then, yeah, like you shut the Zoom off and then you're just kind of like back by yourself and you have to. And so that was something for me. It was like realizing like I have to put in a little more work to like separate like rehearsal space from like day-to-day space, and also making sure that I was doing like aftercare after rehearsal so that like the heaviness of the text wasn't continuing to sit with me throughout my day. And on the downside, you know, sometimes I miss a little applause. But you know, you can get it. Sometimes I actually really hate schmoozing after a show. I like the text. I like the "you did a good job" text. Actually having to go out into the lobby after the show is over, that would be my like purgatory hell. So I also kind of like that we don't have to do that anymore. So yeah, yes and no.
I was going to talk a little bit about sort of the rehearsal process and sort of the feedback process of directing actors, working with actors, and something we asked my actors, like, is it helpful if I stay unmuted so you can hear me laugh if I laugh? Is it helpful? Like, normally in a room, there's sort of alchemy that we can all kind of feel, especially for directors and stage managers, anybody who's a witness to whatever is actors who are working in rehearsal, is there is some sense of reaction, just to sort of give you a sense of not necessarily how things are going, but a sense of liveness and a sense of sort of interplay. And so I was like, do we try to recreate that? But then I realized, well, when we actually present this, there is no audience there either. Like, you're not going to be getting laughs, or not. There is no one who's going to speak back to you. So I think that is what I sort of feel for the actors, like, and I'm curious, you actors in Reese's play is like, how do you get a sense of like sort of how it's going, that run? You know, like, I think how do you start to block out any expectation of any kind of response? And I also am a little bit, I don't want to say concerned, but I was talking to Isaiah about this too, with like, I think sometimes as a director, we think about like what is going to happen when the adrenaline of performance happens, right? Like, what is going to change? Like, is something that has maybe been a little bit more muted going to get really large? Is something, or people can get smaller? Like, how this happens, this is a thrill of live performance, right? Is like, especially as a director, is things happen that are different when there's an audience there. And like, is that same sense of adrenaline going to be there on Friday when this is presented? Or because there is no audience, there is no house lights going down, are we going to miss that? And as someone who's venturing into Zoom theater for the first time with this play, it's a great mystery to me. And it's not all bad at all. It just is a different way of working, a different way of framing expectations.
I'll say for me, and thinking about like that transition, right, of like, you know, being very used to audience energy and reactions, and, you know, how sometimes that feeds into performances, versus being, you know, in my bedroom alone on Zoom or whatever. And whenever, for me, I just try to remind myself of like, why am I doing the work, right? Like, am I doing it for audience like reactions? Like, most of the times, like, no, like, as an artist, like, you know, I trust myself as the character I'm playing. I trust the words that I'm saying. I trust the process that we have been going through. I trust the work that I've been doing individually on my own to like bring this character to life. And so for me, it's really more so like trust within myself as an actress to know that, you know, they're gonna get it. And if they don't, I'm having a good time with my fellow actors on this Zoom call, right? So I think it really goes back to like, why are you doing this work? And if it's something that fuels you and fulfills you, then that audience reaction, you won't really need it for, especially being in a Zoom play. So yeah, I think it comes back to trust, comes back to the enjoyment of what we do. Yeah, that's for me. Cause like once I end or leave rehearsals, I'm like, ooh, that felt real good. And like, I feel energized to go do whatever I have next to do in the evening. Or if it doesn't, like, I know that I can call on my fellow actors. I can call on Edie's and be like, that felt a little rocky for me. Like, can I talk about that? So yeah, I think for me, it really goes back to like the trust within myself and like why I'm doing this work, and not necessarily needing that audience reaction, but just hoping that, you know, they're getting it from their living room spaces or their bedroom spaces or wherever they're watching our performance.
I want to hear what Emily might think, because Emily has some of the funniest scenes in our show. She plays Christopher Columbus, but she's playing him up as this Karen-like character, and Emily's also professionally trained in clown work, and so I want to hear what Emily's thoughts are about not having the audience alchemy that Michael is talking about here, as someone who thrives on audience reaction in your professional work.
I was actually like, when you asked this question, I was going to answer it, but then I was like, I actually don't know how I feel about it, because I'm so close with all the ladies in the play. Like, we all know each other so well, and like that's what I get fed from. Like, I know it's going well just because we can, you know, I can just tell from the people that are on the screen with me. I feel like I get almost as much out of that as if it were to be in like a regular space. I haven't, especially with this play, I haven't felt much of that difference. It's like, oh, I wish I was getting like laughs right now. I don't know what's what. It's I feel very supported, and like we're all vibing together. Yeah, it's hard to tell what. Yeah, it feels pretty similar just because of the people that I'm surrounded by.
Yeah, Emily always makes me like giggle a lot. Like, she's hilarious. It's my first time working with her, and she's so funny. But yeah, no, props to you, girl. Like she makes me break. I'm such a giggly pants. Like it's so easy for me to break. But yeah, the process is definitely feeling what Jordan, Sabine, and Emily are saying. And I've also like kind of changed my technique as an actor, because obviously with theater, there's more of like, you know, you have to perform for everyone in the back of the stage. Whereas like when you're doing film, it's a lot more subtle. So it's like kind of combining those techniques because I still want to keep the theatricality of this play, but also like don't overdo it and stuff. And definitely a lot of self-care, a lot of self-discipline has to come with the process, because in rehearsals, you know, especially, you know, having 5-hour rehearsals, usually, you know, you can get a lot out of it, but because everyone's so busy, like with their lives, with these Zoom meetings, it's like 1 hour, you know, with these people, and then you have to do the work yourself. You have to take care of yourself and make sure, you know, you're doing the work not only for you, but for, you know, your people in your cast.
I think sometimes it can come down to like structure too, like, because I think like in the same way, like in-person rehearsals, like, oh, before like the rehearsals get too intense, like, yeah, maybe people will be sitting out in the seats and kind of like watching what's going on stage. And then when it's getting closer to the show, it's like, no, you can't do that. You need to be like backstage when you're not on stage. And I feel like Zoom, we've kind of been working that way a little bit too. Like earlier in rehearsals, like we keep our video on even if we weren't on stage right now. And so we're, you know, you're seeing, maybe you're not hearing them laugh, but you're seeing them laugh with on mute, you know. And then now, because we're closer to the thing, it's like, okay, well, like, oh, I'm off stage, so like, oh, my video's off, but like, oh, you know, so that dynamic too can affect it.
Yeah, my show, after sitting Zoom show for Zev, is about an experience I had this summer in which a friend of mine from school passed away. And it was about the loneliness I felt of having to be on Zoom and interact with people from college who I had drifted away from in different capacities, or, you know, our relationships had changed in the 2 years since we graduated. But in that moment, how we needed each other, because we had the common knowledge and friendships with Zev, which is a changed name. It's not the real name, but Michael and I have been talking about the, you know, how much of Zoom do we use? You know, at the beginning, do the characters think about whether they want to turn off their self-view or keep it on, and how much interaction we have with Zoom while we're talking to other people on Zoom. You know, whether we one character comes in with a name from the Zoom they had last, much like when I joined, I had my girlfriend's name here because she had used Zoom last. So there's a lot of these different aspects that like reality, like, you know, when we're on stage, we have these different things that we have to acknowledge. You know, if someone has a cast or something, they have to be that role and have a cast, and now we're interacting with each other in a different way, and we have to completely acknowledge the ways in which it makes us closer to each other, and the ways in which we feel incredibly isolated from it, or because of it, which has unfortunately none of the actors are here for it. But I guess the idea of, we've discussed a lot the idea of playing loneliness, and how it can be a trap, because to be lonely is to want to be with other people, and then to try to make a connection, and then having other people and Zoom itself be the things that get in between us can be very difficult.
So I have a question for you then, Isaiah. I'm wondering, because writing mourning and grief is already such a delicate process for playwrights, and I'm wondering what stayed the same and what might what might have changed in writing about mourning and grief for a play that's definitely intended to be on Zoom, right? I mentioned before of like people are doing these Zoom performances, but they're definitely just transfers of things that should have been on stage. Meanwhile, you wrote a piece that's specifically for Zoom, and not just any regular pieces, a piece that is dealing with mourning and grief and navigating that through screens. So I'm wondering, what was your writing process like in that? And Michael, you can piggyback off of that, and like, how has directing mourning and grief been for you?
I think that it made it for me much easier in a sense. I think in my experience of mourning, like in a perhaps a contrived capacity or oversimplified to mourn is to feel like alone while with others in a capacity. And I think Zoom Zoom is in a different way the exact same feeling that we feel like we're with other people. And in these little moments where we look away, whether it's the end of the Zoom or not, we realize that even though we're with people we love to be around, we ultimately are not in some capacity. Writing it was an act of it kept me from my feelings in a way. I actually wrote it in a day. I was super emotional and upset, and it just kind of like spilled out of me. And I think that those two things just fit together so well. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about directing and having the actors mourn on screen?
Sure. I mean, I think something that's big for us, and as you say this all the time, is that like grief is a million things, right? It can look like a million things. They're like, I think I've often told people, like, you do not have to cry. This is not a crying play. Like, I don't, like it's really not about. I think watching people grieve is often watching people sort of just be at the extremes of their emotionality, and that can be on any side, sort of any and every flavor is welcome, and that's something I really try to encourage in sort of what our actors bring to the table. I do think it's a specific thing where we are living in a year where grief is everywhere and death is everywhere. And many people in our rehearsal room have experienced big losses over the course of not only the process, not only of the year, but of the 3 weeks, 4 weeks that we've been working together. So it something I've sort of talked to Isaiah about in terms of rewriting is like, if the play is taking place in this year, you can't not mention coronavirus. Like we can't not understand that that's on everyone's minds all the time. It's sort of the sense of who's sick, who's healthy, who's here, who's not. So that has just been prescient, and sort of because our play takes place very much in like the real world, it takes very specifically place in July of 2020, that it's felt like, well, we have to talk about what people were talking about. And in some ways it's almost a period piece, like in how sort of what we're talking about is slightly different now than it was 6 months ago, which is a whole other conversation. But I don't know if I'm saying anything that is eloquent or makes any kind of sense. But yeah, it is a conversation like anything else. Sort of like, what does it mean to talk about grief right now, which is different than what'll be talked about grief in a year or what it was a year ago.
Let me move us into the last section of our discussion, and that is what is a Latinx piece of theater, what that means. I teach a immigrant writing workshop at the New York Public Library, which Edie has taught as well. And one thing I always have to define when people come in, because it's open to the public, is what is immigrant writing? And I think it's a very similar conversation, and oftentimes the class is full of immigrants, and sometimes there are people who aren't immigrants in the class. And my task for them is always to have them write an immigrant piece, whatever that means to them. And I always tell them that I guess, like Michael was saying about mourning, you know, like the idea of a piece being Latinx or an immigrant piece is more something that we kind of create in our minds. But I also that it almost can be anything. But at the same time, when there are pieces out, the label of something being a Latinx play or book often only gets applied to certain things, unfairly so. So I guess that's I was wondering if anyone can or wants to talk about that.
I got words.
I worked too, sis.
In the sense of the term Latino, Latinx, Latine, in the most recent conversations over the years is much more complicated than just South America, Latin America, Caribbean, Latinx spaces. Research shows that those terms are colonial terms, Hispanic, Latino, to put a wide umbrella over a huge variety of people. I mean, Isaiah and I are both Latinx, but we walk very different paths of lives. And just as I will walk a very different path of life than Sabine. So I think that there's a part of me, this is going to blow the whole thing out of the water, this whole Friday night evenings from Latinx playwrights, but I really don't think the term is sustainable anymore for the way that people have needed to navigate their lives despite having that term. When we call someone Latino, what are we really saying in the US? What does that term really mean when we call someone Latino? When I describe my piece, I still use the term calling myself Latina, but I'm very much a Caribbean Puerto Rican artist first and foremost. And that's the best way to describe me and my identities and how I walk my life. And this play is a Caribbean play. Very much of the same walk a line as like Walcott and other Caribbean artists. So yeah, it's a complicated term, and I don't think it's the best term to describe our Friday night evenings, but it's also sometimes weirdly the only term. How do you describe such a large diasporic, all these diasporic identities that are all linked to very traumatic histories? And that's really the one thing that bonds that word is trauma. So it's weighty, it's heavy, and that's a whole other conversation, hour-long Zoom recorded conversation. But yeah, it's something I have a lot of difficulty with, especially walking my life as a non-white Latinx person, and to be in community with white Latinos is very difficult for me sometimes because we don't walk the same paths of life. And of course, I don't walk the same path of life as visually Black Latinos that live in the US and beyond. So yes, really complicated. And I'm still grappling with that. And there's a part of me that wants to divorce some of how I walk my way of life to that term.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the points that Edie said. My background, my mom has Afro ancestry and my father is of European descent. So it's like I kind of see most of the spectrum of like what we consider Latinidad, but it's also this weird hierarchy of like, oh, you're not Latino because of this or that or whatever, like trying to see who's the most Latino, even though it's like, what the hell is it even that? What does that even mean? And like another thing that you pointed out, Isaiah, was like the immigration thing. Because like you also have to remember, like there are people who didn't have a choice. You know, we were taken from Africa to Caribbean and also South America and the Americas, and also in Mexico, the Mexican border, like they weren't, like people didn't immigrate the border, like cross them because of, you know, manifest destiny and all that little, you know, fighting over land and all that. But yeah, that's a heavy topic. I still like yeah, I can't. We gotta. I'll let someone else talk. If Jordan, Sabine, I'm lost.
I guess so. I think part of what makes Latinx identity so complicated is something that Sandra and I'm going to steal a line at least from your thesis, but the idea of like cyborg identity, that in any corner of Latinx diaspora, you're seeing this crossing of European ancestry, Black ancestry, and also Indigenous ancestry, and because of those. The mixing of those ethnicities and races, you see such division even within the culture, and there's so much colorism within the culture, and privilege and racism within our own culture. So that it's like you see this weird thing of like, people want to be like, oh, like, you know, Translatinidad, like, let's hold hands, sisterhood, or you even see that within the Caribbean, people being like, hey, Caribbean, like, you know, you eat plantains too, let's go. But that's not always the actual reality, because you could have, like, even just within Puerto Rico, you could have 50 Puerto Ricans in a room and they could all look completely different and then treat each other completely different because of that. So, like, yeah.
I would love to hear, sorry, Sandra, I interrupted you, but I would love to hear Sabine's thoughts, because Sabine is of Haitian descent. And there is a lot of course, conversations around, like, in the Haitian communities, like, what does Latino, that term, mean for our community, especially with its history with the Dominican Republic and Dominica. And, you know, I would love to hear some of your thoughts, Sabine, on working in our piece that's very Caribbean in its history, but not necessarily for you, maybe Latinx. So I would love to hear that.
Thanks, Edie's. For me to work on this piece, wow, processing still, but like I think about the way that anti-Blackness just works across the diaspora, and thinking about the anti-Blackness like in the neighboring country next to Haiti, so like the Dominican Republic, right? And you know, for Edie's to specifically cast Michael as a like phenotypically darker skinned woman really says something to me, because especially like Michael being the archangel, that's like, you know, God's right-hand man, right? So what does it mean to see the humanity of Blackness, of Black women, of Black people, and especially within Latinx culture, right? Within Latinx nations. And to be honest, this is something that I'm thinking about, because it's only recently, like I rarely ever think of myself as Afro-Latinx. I'm really just always like, I'm Caribbean, I'm Haitian. But I think that's something that I've recently been thinking about, and thinking about like why it is that I have never considered myself in such a way, or like considered that identity for myself. And that very much really has to do with like the anti-Blackness, right? And how Black folks are treated, and especially how Haitian folks are treated. And personally, me learning more of that history, but to be a part of this show that is written by an Afro-Latinx femme, I absolutely love it, especially like the intentionality behind the casting that Edie's, the intentionality that Edie's put behind the casting of the characters. So this is something that I'm still processing and something that I'm still looking into. But to be a part of this show, I think we are resisting this idea that, you know, like we're resisting anti-Blackness, I believe. And yeah, that's what I have so far. I'm still processing. I hope that that made sense. And thank you for bringing me into that question, Edie.
Yeah, I think the last thing I was going to really say was that, like, Latinidad wouldn't exist without colonization. And you got to think about what that means, because everyone pointed out like the colorism, the racism, like how do we help perpetuate the world that we live in with our Latinidad? Because, you know, look at Cubans in Florida. Enough said.
Sandra's sore
Florida
about that one. Sore.
Like, I'm Cuban and Dominican, so I'm like, oh, God.
It's so complicated, and like I would love to reel Isaiah very quickly in this conversation too, because Isaiah and I have had many conversations about our Latinidad, and Isaiah comes from a Jewish Latinidad Mexican background, and for me, I come from a Black Puerto Rican father, a mixed Puerto Rican mother. My great grandmother looks fucking Arawak. It's I have grown up with seeing so many different I hate the term rainbow, but like my sister is a completely different skin color than I am, and we come from the same two parents, and we navigate the world differently, the two of us. And so I want to reel Isaiah in as a white Latino. You know, what does it mean for you to write Latinidad for the stage, especially as someone who navigates the world differently than a lot of us on this call?
I think that's something that is always on my mind when I'm writing, is how contrived the theater and film community sees Latinidad as an actor. Yeah, I have not seen, you know, whenever there's a character who's male and Latino, I'm just never what they're looking for, and the idea of me showing up, oftentimes I know it, and I don't want to show up, because I know that the character, what they're really talking about is they want someone who is Afro-Latino, and I don't feel comfortable showing up there because that role is not meant for me. But so it makes me feel like, as a writer, one of my main goals is to spread the understanding, which it already is so far past that, of people, of what one thing that I learned a couple of years ago. My dad, his grandpa and grandmother came over from Poland 10 years before the Holocaust, and they lived in Mexico for generations. My dad came over here when he was about my age, and he learned that 2 blocks over, there was an entire community of Muslim immigrants who came over at the same time to Mexico, and they didn't go to the United States because, for the exact same reason. The United States had a quota, and there's populations in Argentina as well, and these communities never interacted at all, and yet they have so much in common, which just goes to say there is so much Latinidad that is so beyond me, because all you guys are saying, it's so the idea of it being something is so contrived in itself. It's an infinite amount of things and an infinite amount of experiences, and yet at the same time, when I was creating this night, I felt that I wanted to use the term Latinx to describe us, because even though the term feels so anachronistic, unfortunately, it also feels like the symbol or the slogan that we have to push on. You know, we have to put it there so that we can break it in some senses.
Ooh, take a glass of water after that, Isaiah. No, I completely agree. It's so contrived and so vapid as a term nowadays, particularly when we bring in conversations about darker skinned Afro-Latinx folk into these conversations, and that at the end of the day, they still get the short end of the stick at this like this giant umbrella of a term, right? So it is contrived, but unfortunately, as you said, it's how do we there is a thread. There is some type of thread that links all these communities together. And what is it? Maybe it's right now we have to use the term Latinx, Latine, Latino, but it's beyond that. There is no word for. Your conversation about the Muslim community reminds me of the huge Japanese community in the Dominican Republic. There's like a huge Japanese community, huge Chinese community in the DR, and they very much are like, we are Dominicans. We are Dominicans. We speak the lingo, we speak the language, and we are also Asian. So it's so which just pushes forward this like Latinx is the ethnicity, not a race. And even in its ethnicity, it doesn't even fit that as well. So yeah, a lot to ponder, a lot to chew. But yes, wonderfully said, Isaiah.
And if you want to chew more, I think that's a wonderful place to conclude. 8 o'clock this Friday, come to Radio Bemba. We have 4 short plays where you'll see all of the work of all of these wonderful artists and more. We also want to plug our 2 other writers, Chase Doggett and Makasha Copeland. Couldn't be with us today because they are in Texas. Please support those in Texas. There are what's the
There's a
mutual
lot
aid?
of mutual aid funds that are going around. If you just search mutual aid fund Texas, you're going to be linked to 20 of them. Water's down, electricity I heard is coming back in some spaces. Heat is bad, like there's no heat. People are dying while trying to get warm in their cars. So any little bit helps. So if you can spare $1 or $2 to a mutual aid fund, that would be great.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you Friday.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
All right, guys, that was wonderful.
Yay! Amazing job, everybody. Look at us. Can we also,
How do I stop recording? Michael, I think you have to do it.